Kamala, if we find out that that is Kamala's real grandmother and that she decided to appropriate the domestic help who potentially died younger as her grandmother, we are watching one of the most diabolical political moves that we have ever seen in the history of this country.
Welcome back. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a video.
Welcome back to the channel, family. I hope each and every one of you are doing well. If you haven't already, definitely hit that subscribe button. What we do over here is talk about hot topics that are going on in the community. And I got a hot one for you guys today. Not sure if you heard of this. This hasn't hit mainstream yet, but we may have a little bit of a scandal going on. But I want to keep this brief and be able to let Candace take over and explain everything that she found out. Now, I did edit down the videos because there are several of them. So with the best clips and evidence that she did find that there may be something going on. We're not quite positive or 100% sure yet, but I want to bring you guys the information that was found out just this past week. But definitely subscribe to the channel and like the video for support. But I thank each and every one of you for commenting on the video, and please put your insights in the comments below, because when I came across these videos, I had to share it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it.
And pointed out a major discrepancy, mainly that her grandmother, who she produced a photo of herself with, happened to die before Kamala was born. So yeah, seems a little odd, just asking questions here. Well, today we were able to secure the birth certificates and the death certificates and some marriage certificates, which confirm that Kamala either made a huge mistake, all by accident, or she outright lied because she wanted to convince the public that she was Black. Do not go away, you guys, because this is about to get crazy. Welcome back to Candace. All right, so let's recap. Yesterday, I can admit I was completely triggered. I was triggered by the manner in which the Guardian, or a Guardian reporter rather, treated Janet Jackson in a profile piece. It was very obvious they were trying to do the wacko jacko bit again, like they did with her brother. So to remind you, Janet Jackson brought up in her interview human trafficking, child trafficking, and the journalist then decided to heavily imply that Janet Jackson was just nuts, to pretend that we have a child trafficking issue in this country. And then when the reporter switched gears and asked her about supporting Kamala Harris as the first female Black president, you know, Hollywood's all got to get in line and support this woman or else, Janet Jackson simply said that she had heard that Kamala was not Black and that she was in fact Irish, and the media predictably went completely crazy. I mean, here are some of the headlines here. NBC, Janet Jackson tells interviewer she's heard Kamala Harris is not Black, echoing election disinformation. Oh, love that word. Newsweek, Janet Jackson's Kamala Harris remarks spark Black backlash. The Independent, she's not Black. Janet Jackson makes shocking comments about Kamala Harris's heritage. And of course, the New York Times, Janet Jackson repeats false claims about Kamala Harris's race. False claims. So to be clear, all Janet Jackson said was, quote, "That's what I heard, that she's Indian, that her father's white. That's what I was told. I mean, I haven't watched the news in a few days. I was told that they discovered that her father was white." Okay? That is all that she said that led to all of this craziness in the media trying to paint her like she was some sort of a psycho. And then her manager, a guy named Mo Elmarzi that I'm showing you a picture of here, he offered an apology on Janet Jackson's behalf to BuzzFeed. He said, quote, "Janet Jackson would like to clarify her recent comments. She recognizes that her statements regarding Vice President Kamala Harris's racial identity were based on misinformation. Janet respects Harris's dual heritage as both Black and Indian and apologizes for any confusion caused. She values the diversity that Harris represents and understands the importance of celebrating that in today's society. Janet remains committed to promoting unity and understanding," end quote. And guess what happened? Janet Jackson fired him immediately and said that he was not authorized to make that statement at all, and she was not apologizing because she was not sorry, and good for her. I'm glad she fired him. I am so tired of people being so fake, having to apologize for something that should not have yielded any response from the media. In fact, it should have been the opposite. They should have went ahead and investigated the claim that Kamala Harris is Black, gotten to the bottom of it fully. But instead, it was a media pylon. And then, after being fired, Mo added to that pylon by referring to Janet Jackson as unbalanced. Like, the person who just worked for her came out and was like, she's unbalanced. I mean, with friends like that, who needs enemies? Then came me. I don't know. I guess I really am the person that has been in these streets, Kamala, because I decided to simply look into her genealogy. Because why on earth is the world trying to convince me that this woman is suddenly Black? Like, they just decided she was Black because she's running and because there is evidence, it is true, that her father grew up in Jamaica. Your race does not magically change because of where you grow up, okay? If I grow up in Sweden, I don't get to suddenly say I'm white, okay? And what I discovered was quite startling. Now, I'll ask you, when did you first get the idea that Kamala was Black? Well, you'll say, yeah, when she kind of started running with Joe Biden. And that claim really came from Kamala herself. When they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, they understood that Kamala Harris published a book in 2019 called The Truth That We Hold. And presumably the book was filled with truth that she was holding. I had a look through it and I saw this picture of her and her grandmother, clearly a Black-looking grandmother, on page 282 in the photograph section. It reads, as you can see, visiting my paternal grandmother, Beryl, in Jamaica. Also on that same page, there's another photo of her. Again, you can see it's black and white. I'm not quite sure why it is black and white, but it says, when I was 10 months old, I visited Spanish Town, Jamaica. This is me with my mother and my paternal grandfather, Oscar Joseph. And now this guy looks mixed. He looks Asian of some description, but you can see the idea here is that she's definitely trying to introduce, in a manner of photos, things that make her race look more complicated. So I just decided to investigate that, and immediately things got weird, very weird. First and foremost, because it was very easy for me to determine via just a light search online that Beryl, her alleged paternal grandmother that you just saw, died 4 years before Kamala was born in 1960. So last night we decided to continue our research to see if we could find birth certificates and marriage certificates and death certificates, which could further signify those points. And indeed it did. And it also raised even more questions about her genealogy. So let's go through those. Here is the birth certificate for her paternal grandmother. This is Kamala's paternal grandmother, Beryl. Okay, now you can see on this birth certificate that Beryl is spelled with an I. It's Beryl Magdalene. And you can see the reason why we know this is the correct Beryl is because the mother is listed as Iris Finnegan. Later on, we're going to show you in the book, she names Iris Finnegan as her great grandmother. So that would be Beryl's mother. So we have the right woman. Also, formerly, her maiden name is Allen. That is true. It also says here that she's born in October of 1917 in St. Anne. That's the St. Anne parish of Jamaica. And again, you can see it says that it is signed by Iris Finnegan. Very clearly, this is the woman that we are looking for. This is Kamala's grandmother, alleged grandmother, Beryl. It's also interesting, by the way, that it lists her great-grandmother as a seamstress because Donald Harris, Kamala's father, wrote in a 2020 piece called Reflections of a Jamaican Father, quote, Miss Iris, that again would be his grandmother, was the mother of 8 children, too, was the sweetest and gentlest person one could meet, but underneath it was a tough farming woman who ran the cane farm at Thatch Walk near Annan Town, jointly owned with her husband, Mr. Christie. Okay, that's weird. So you're telling me that she ran a farm because on that birth certificate, it says that actually Iris was a seamstress, but whatever. Let's just park that aside for a second and stick with Beryl, this woman who died before Kamala was born, okay? Because I was feeling pretty certain that not too many people were going to be named Beryl and be born in the St. Anne parish of Jamaica in 1917 to a mother named Iris Finnegan. I felt confident that we could find a little bit more data, and in fact, we did, okay? First, we stumbled across Beryl's marriage certificate, okay? So you can see that right here, and now the name spelling has changed. You have Beryl Finnegan spelled with a Y in the same way that Kamala spells it, and it lists their married date as 1944. Again, you can see the parish that is listed is St. Anne Parish. This is where every piece of Beryl's life seems to take place. It reads here that her calling is a barmaid. And something that jumped out at me was the fact that she's married to someone, as you can see, named Lawford Newland. Okay, so Beryl apparently was married more than once, because Lawford Newland is not Donald Harris's father, but Beryl is his mother. So just to be clear, again, it says that she married a guy named Lawford Newland in 1944 when she was 25 years old, okay? It's important to note that that would have been 4 years after she gave birth to Donald Harris, Kamala's father. I find that to be very strange. Also, regarding Kamala's father, we cannot seem to locate, regarding Lawland Newland, the person that she married, we can't find him. Can't find him anywhere. We cannot find a birth certificate. We cannot find a death certificate. We can't find a news item or otherwise. I cannot find this alleged Lawford Newland that apparently her grandma got married to. We also can't find a wedding certificate for Beryl and Oscar Wilde Joseph Brown Harris. That is allegedly supposed to be Donald Harris's father. Okay, so Kamala's grandfather is Oscar Wilde Joseph Brown Harris, and we can't find a marriage certificate between the two of them. That's very strange. As speculated, we were able to confirm that Kamala's Black grandmother that she showed us in that picture died in 1960, before Kamala was born. I can show you right now her death certificate. Let's take a look at Beryl's death certificate, which confirms. As you can see there, it says that she died in July of 1960. It also tells us on the right-hand side, you guys will probably have to zoom in on this, but she died of a uterine infection, uterine fibroids due to a hysterectomy. It has her listed as 39 years. That's actually a couple of years off from 1917, so somebody may have gotten their math wrong here. But you once again see that it lists her birthplace as St. Anne. And so this is a huge scandal. Just an absolutely huge scandal. Kamala Harris published in her book that she was standing next to her Grandma Beryl. But Grandma Beryl died in 1960, 4 years before Kamala Harris was born. So who the hell is the real Beryl? Who is that woman standing next to Kamala Harris? And do you know what I noticed about that woman standing next to her? She looks a lot like the woman that Kamala claims in her book is her great-grandmother, Iris. Now, that's Iris Finnegan. Here's the book with my great-grandmother, Iris Finnegan in Jamaica. Now, I'm going to give you the side-by-side of Iris and her alleged daughter, Beryl, who died at 39. Now, that woman on the right is not 39 years old. She's clearly much more advanced in her age. I mean, we know black don't crack. I mean, that's just a scientific fact. So I would put that woman on the right-hand side, who she tried to pass off as Beryl, and I think is the exact same person. I would say that that woman looks to be about 65. And then it looks like she's more advanced on the left-hand side. The great-grandmother, that's the same person. When I just believe my own eyes, we're looking at the same person. What do you guys think when you look at those photos? How the hell does a person who is the vice president of the United States pass off a book, claim that these people that are in her book are her black relatives, and nobody bats an eyelash or does even a peripheral search to recognize that the woman that she put forth is implausibly her grandmother? And by the way, I'm going to say this and people can be offended, but the first thing that I thought when I saw the photo of her sitting on her great-grandmother's lap was that this doesn't look like a grandparent affection going on here. Like, this woman looks like she could be working for the family. Quite literally, I thought to myself, this woman looks like she could be the help. And I thought that because there's a lack of affection there. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no, like, in both of the photos, there's a lack of affection. It's just like a woman standing next to her. And I obviously know that that was a circumstance. When you're talking about a family that had a ton of plantations, which is the reality. She descends from Irish slavers. That is a fact that Kamala Harris cannot deny. She descends from wealthy Irish slavers who virtually they did own the town. They named the town. It was Hamilton Town, then it was Brownstown in Jamaica. He had over 1,000 slaves, okay? It would follow that there would be help around the house. And I'm just going to put here as a question mark, not as a fact. If they're looking at some of these photos of people who became like family and they're trying to pass them off like relatives, again, not a fact, a huge question mark, but my instinct tells me that that person is actually not her family member. And if it is, well, Kamala's got some explaining to do. How did she meet Grandma Beryl almost 20 years after Grandma Beryl died? Because Kamala Harris looks to be about 20 in that photo that she presented. Then there's another bit of a mystery, as I said. If Beryl married after her or before her wedding when she was 25 years old to the missing Newland, if anybody can find Newland, please let me know. But if Beryl married at some point Oscar Wilde Joseph Brown, where is their marriage certificate? And where is their divorce certificate? Again, I'm only prodding the narrative here because I'm going to need proof that she's Black. The media has now made this a thing, and now you made it so much of a thing that you're attacking people like Janet Jackson when she asks a very reasonable question that you should be able to respond to. And now we have a verifiable lie that Kamala Harris told in her book, or a big uh-oh, because, if I'm being nice, I guess sometimes you think when you're publishing a book that it's a photo of you and your grandmother that you never met or never could have met. Maybe Kamala was just confused and thought it was her grandma, but it was a grandmother that she had, again, never met. Media should be on this, and they should be asking her this question. How did you make this significant of a blunder in your book? And isn't it quite ironic that every photo that you have presented, two of which look like they're the exact same person, one aged on, which begs the question, is that even Kamala Harris in her lap? I don't know. Again, we're at the beginning of this investigation. But it's interesting that amongst all of the relatives, so many Irish white slavers, the only photos that she chose to put in this book are the ones that make it look as though she might be Black. And we have just significantly and without question debunked one of those photos. Also, there's something else that I notice about Beryl and Oscar, this alleged married couple, right? Our alleged husband and wife. Each of them are listed as having a lot of siblings. Oscar's siblings are named Hildred May Harris, Newton Alexander Harris, and Ina Doreen Harris. I cannot find a single photo of these siblings. Now, why am I looking for it? Well, because people take family photos all the time. Tons of the stuff is on the internet. I mean, one of those people lived until 2005. Ina Doreen Harris allegedly lived until 2005. I would just like to see a photo to confirm that these are Black relatives. I just want to confirm their race. Can't find a trace. Similarly for Beryl Finnegan has siblings too. Their names are Abraham Judah Finnegan, Noah Pendergast Finnegan, Bernard Washington Finnegan, and Gloria Eugenie Hill. Where are they? Or where are any photos of them, presuming that they've passed? Where are the photos of them? They've got to be somewhere, right? Something very suspicious is going on. I don't know how it is plausible, guys. Do not allow the media to gaslight us. It is not difficult, okay, for a person that is running for president of the United States to have a tidy background. This is my mom. This is my dad. This is my grandma. That it always seems to be the case that right before they run, they introduce like one or two photos that they allege are from their childhood. This is my grandma. This is my mom. And if you ask any more questions, I'm going to scream at you and call you a racist, is completely ridiculous. We now have a scandal on our hands, okay? And again, this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep looking for these relatives. I'm going to confirm that all of these people are in fact Black. I find it strange, just as a little tidbit, that when you go on these genealogy websites, you can see that there's somebody managing the profile. All of the people that are managing the profile for Kamala's relatives are white. What interest would white people around the United States have in managing the profile for this Jamaica family? Unless Well, unless what Janet Jackson said was true, and that these are her white Irish relatives, and she's been hiding that fact by trying to introduce some random photos of a woman and purporting that that woman is her grandmother. Again, if she's been with you throughout your entire life, Kamala, you could drop some more photos, but no matter what, you lied in your book, okay? You lied in your book. That woman died in 1960, and you were born in 1964, and I find that to be extremely problematic. Like I said, I'm in these streets, just like you, Kamala, so if you want to come out and tell the truth, I'm going to be on this. Otherwise, you might as well come up with your storyline, because I don't tend to let go when I have the scent of somebody who's telling a lie. Email from a woman all the way in New Zealand who decided to turn into Sherlock Holmes and fully dedicate herself to investigating Kamala Harris and all of these missing documents and all of these questions. And what she uncovered is potentially so shocking and so alarming that we can officially close the $1,000 bounty because she's earned it. I mean, she's going to receive the full 1K. Because this is now getting dark and twisted, and my suspicions about Kamala Harris potentially pretending that the help was her family maybe have been confirmed. I'm going to let you guys judge. Don't want to get way ahead of myself, but do not go away, and welcome back to Candace. I don't even know where we begin here. I mean, I'm just shaken. So look, if you're just jumping into this, you got to stop and you got to go back 2 episodes and play catch up, episode 70 and episode 71, because we're not going to do too much recapping here because I want to jump right into this. Basically, someone came for Janet Jackson and I answered the door. It was a discrepancy that was in Kamala's book. A woman that she said was her grandmother named Beryl, a picture of her and her grandmother Beryl. Here it is, visiting my paternal grandmother Beryl in Jamaica. And then I did just a brief search online and found out that Beryl allegedly died 4 years before Kamala was born. So that's a major red flag. Then I had a little bit of a gut instinct. The photos that were being presented of Kamala and her grandparents, great-grandmother and Beryl, I just felt that the women, or the woman, because I think they look remarkably alike, I just feel that maybe this woman was the help. And I'm not saying that because she's black. I'm not racist against black people. I am black. I'm saying this because there's just a lack of emotion there. Like, I don't know if it's just my grandparents, but when they're with you, they're like super cuddly and cute. And this woman's just kind of very serious each time that she's being featured here. So anyways, what happened was we sourced Beryl's birth certificate. And then my instinct got a little bit stronger because her name was spelled differently in the birth certificate, right? So you see that it says Beryl spelled B-E-R-I-L, Magdalene. And we know for a fact, by the way, so people that are submitting other birth certificates, this is definitively the correct birth certificate because it says Iris Finnegan. And we know based on Kamala and Kamala's father, Donald J. Harris, that Iris Finnegan is the mother of Beryl. And then we see that her name changes, the spelling of her name changes, rather, by the time that we looked at her marriage certificate. Suddenly you can see that the marriage certificate has her name being spelled with a Y. Now that to me signaled that maybe she definitely is the help, and I'll tell you why. So my grandfather, before he passed away, maybe like 10 years before he passed away, I got kind of obsessed with trying to find all of these documents pertaining to his life, because I realized like that's my ancestry. And I was having a ton of trouble mining his grandmother's information because on each document, her name was spelled differently, as well as other people in the family. And I was like, Granddad, why is everyone's name spelled differently depending on the document? Like, this is very confusing. Why is it sometimes spelled Liza versus Eliza versus like Lizbeth? That was his grandmother's name. And he explained to me that they didn't know how to read and write. So you forget this. You forget that you had a world, the majority of people couldn't read and write, especially if you were not considered like a high-class person. My grandfather grew up on a sharecropping farm. And so what that meant was even if you had a name, if you couldn't read and write, you were going up to the register, whether it was for birth, whatever it was, and you were just telling somebody the name. You weren't saying like, hi, it's Candace, C-A-N-D-A-C-E. You're just saying Candace, and one person might spell it C-A-N-D-I-S. Somebody might spell it C-A-N-D-I-C-E. If you do not know how to read and write, you don't recognize these discrepancies. So that actually, I thought, was a good thing in terms of like my idea that this woman could have potentially just been the help, maybe like on my scent. But I didn't want to be too convinced. Obviously, you know, I lean into the conspiracy mindset because we've been lied to so many times. But like I said, we did find that marriage certificate between Beryl and Lawford, Newland, which was in July of 1944. And I want to be clear, guys, we know for a fact this is the correct Beryl. So we're not confused here and looking for more documentation when it comes to the birth or the marriage, because the correct parents are listed. You can see Patrick Finnegan is listed. And so we know that Beryl's parents are Iris Finnegan and Patrick Finnegan. So that is the correct parent, the correct marriage certificate. But we had no idea who Lawford Newland was. We had no idea that Beryl had allegedly been married after she birthed Donald Harris. That would be Kamala Harris's father. Thought that was like quite strange. She would have been 6 years old in 1944. Donald Harris was born in 1938. So this means that she got married to this guy, Lawford Newland, and she had a 6-year-old. So I thought that was quite strange. I couldn't find anything on Lawford Newland, but somebody on the team was able to determine that he arrived on a ship to New Orleans. He arrived in New Orleans, from Jamaica in May of 1943. So we're showing you here the ship manifest, and Lawford Newland is on the ship, and he is listed as, he's listed as a Negro. He's Black. It says his marital status is single. That would be correct, because this would have been a trip the year before he got married to Beryl. So quite strangely, he went to New Orleans, and then I guess he at some point had to have gone back just a year later to get married. We still have not been able to locate the relevant marriage certificate between Oscar Harris. Now that's, again, Kamala's dad. His father is Oscar Harris. We cannot find that marriage between Kamala's grandfather and Beryl. So that's like a huge question mark there, right? Like, where is that marriage certificate? If you guys find it, we're checking our emails, and we're obviously aware that there are a lot of different Beryls that are being born in Jamaica at different times. Some people are like, this could be the case of 2 Beryls, and they're sending us different birth certificates. Like I said, we know we have the correct birth certificate. We know we have the correct marriage certificate. We know for a fact that this Beryl did get married, and that Donald should have been 6 years old when she got married. So it begs the question, was this her second marriage? Did she have a child out of wedlock with Oscar Harris? Did she have Donald? And then did she get married? Because it lists her on her marriage certificate as a spinster, which means that she's not married, obviously. And then she gets married to Lawford Newland. And then at some point they would have had to divorce if she remarried and got married to Oscar. So she would have had to have gotten with him, had a child with him, married somebody else, divorced that somebody else, and then gotten back together with Oscar and gotten married. That's like a lot of movement. Again, we don't have any documentation, so we're not going to speculate. But Beryl in general, I'm not describing her as the dog that's not barking, okay? So some people were saying, well, I've seen on different websites that there was also a Beryl Harris that died in 1995, and maybe this could potentially be her. We've done the math on that. No, that woman would have been born in 1914. Like I said, we know for a fact Beryl was born. The birth certificates are probably the most relevant source, because you obviously wouldn't have a birth certificate written years later after the fact that your child was born. It says that Beryl was born in 1917. But I started going back to that piece that Donald Harris wrote. Remember, the first time that we were kind of introduced to the fact that Kamala Harris was Black, it was because Donald Harris wrote this piece, which came right behind Kamala Harris's book, Reflections of a Jamaican Father. And I just would like to, by the way, really stress to you how Black he was trying to suddenly make them. Like, I'm just going to read you the first sentence of this by Donald J. Harris, Kamala's father. As a child growing up in Jamaica, I often heard it said by my parents and family friends, "'Member where you come from." And then he goes on and he writes, my one big regret is that Kamala and her sister did not come to know very well the 2 most influential women in my life, Miss Chrissy and Miss Iris. Okay, so those are his grandparents, according to him. Those are both of his grandmothers, maternal and paternal. And then the whole piece is about his grandmother, his two grandmothers. And he wrote, both of my grandmothers had the strongest influence on my early upbringing. And then in parentheses, he writes, not to exclude, of course, the influence of my dear mother, Miss Beryl, and loving father, Mass Oscar. Like, I think it's supposed to be like Massa, like Mass Oscar. Very strange. Again, nobody that I know calls their mom Miss Beryl, calls their grandmother Miss Iris, and calls their other grandmother Miss Iris. There's something about that that doesn't strike me as familial. But again, that's speculation. Doesn't matter. Maybe there is this strange family where everyone, like, they address their mom as Miss, and they address their grandmother as Miss, and they address their other grandmother as Miss, like that. It really isn't up to us to make any conclusions. But that's the first and last time that he mentioned his mother, Miss Beryl, okay? Which signals to me that my theory about her having died young, you're saying you're raised by your grandparents, but your mother is around, but you don't talk about your mother or speak about your mother at all in this entire piece, signals to me that this is correct and your mother died early, okay? You're not mentioning her for a reason. So then this gets crazy. I get an email. Actually, I got 2 emails, but this one in particular made me sit up straight in bed. Like, I'm not kidding. I was like about to fall asleep, and I just decided to check the email box, and I sat up. I sat up just like this and started texting everyone. And I woke my husband up. I was like, you have to read this email. This is completely crazy. It came all the way from New Zealand. Shout out to New Zealand. I'll be on tour there soon, you guys. Get out there, buy some tickets, because we're going to talk about this now. That's the only thing I'm going to speak about in New Zealand. But I'm going to just read this email to you because it's just incredible. Kia ora from New Zealand, Candace. My name is blank. And after your first podcast about the family of Kamala Harris yesterday, I went down the rabbit hole all day looking for photos of Beryl Finnegan Harris's brothers and sisters, as you asked. I was so intrigued and I wanted to take up your challenge. I could not find those photos, but I did come across a record that you might be interested in. I noticed on Kamala's birth certificate, you showed that her father, Donald Harris, was 26 at her birth in 1964, giving him a presumable birth year of 1938. That is correct. He was born in 1938. I'm just saying that as an aside. I came across the attached record of a 1-year-old child who died in 1940 in St. Anne's Parish. This infant's name was Donald Harris. You will notice the baby's father's name that is given was Albert Harris, and there's no mother mentioned. However, you will be interested to notice that a person listed as present at the death of the child was none other than Beryl Harris. She has also signed the death record. What are the chances that Beryl had her own baby named Donald in 1938, and then was also in attendance of the passing of a baby named Donald Harris in 1940? Weird, right? And just to be clear, that we're going to show you that certificate because it would mean that there were 2 Donald Harris babies born that Beryl was around. One was hers and one, I don't know, guys. It's getting weird. I'm going to finish this email, then we're going to talk about it. I have looked for the infant's father, Albert Harris, and cannot find a lot about him. Albert's father name was Abraham Harris. I believe it is possible he was married to a Violet Fearon on the 6th of March, 1935. No record of her passing, so why was she not at her child's death, but Beryl Harris was? Was this baby Beryl's or Violet's? If Donald Harris passed 1 year old, who is the man claiming to be Kamala's father? Oh my gosh, chill. She wrote, make it make sense. I'll keep digging. Chills. I was like, what are you talking about? I've opened this email so fast. It was crazy. And let me just show you the attachment. Chills. I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out all over again. It's hitting me. It's a second wave here of what? So yes, you will see that listed here. This is a death certificate that is on the 29th of November, 1940, okay, in St. Anne Parish. That obviously is where her family is from. And yes, the child's name was Donald Harris. The child died before the child turned 2. So this would mean that it is plausible that this child was born in 1938, the exact same year that Donald J. Harris, Kamala's father, was born. Okay. Can you pull it back up? I'm not done reading through this. Okay. So you have also, it says the certified cause of death is fever and a cold. And it's letting you know, it says the duration of the illness, so that this baby was sick for 1 month, rest in peace. And it does mention that that baby is the son of Albert Harris. And just as this person speculates, it is signed by Beryl Harris. And it tells you, because you're supposed to include this, the signature of the person who was present at the death. And it says Beryl Harris, present at the death. And that is at Mount Moriah in St. Anne. Now, I want to be clear, there is no place to put the mother's name. So it's not like there's anything like strange here. I just think that if this is this Beryl's child, And this Beryl Harris was married to this Albert Harris, or together with this Albert Harris at some time. Like, that is the reason why it just says that present for the death. Like, literally, who else would be present? If your child is dying less than 2 years old, okay, barely 2 years old, who would you allow to be there in your place? There's no mother on earth that wouldn't be next to their child. So it is very heavily suggested that Beryl Harris was there for the presence of her son, Donald Harris, dying. And that would put that approximate birth of that baby at 1938. Stop the press. Stop the press. Okay. So you can imagine me. Now you're me sitting up straight. Like, what is going on here? Like, actually, what do I know about Kamala's father? Like, this could be a coincidence. I'm sure. Yeah, I guess you could have like a lot of Beryls that are giving birth to Donalds in the year 1938 in St. Anne Parish. Of course, like you have to consider every possibility here, but also consider that this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Okay. So then I received a second email. Okay. Very interesting here. Very interesting here. And I'm just going to read the email. I'm just going to read the email and take you through this. What happens when I go through my info box that I tell you guys to message with deets. This email says, "Hi, Candace. See the death certificate below indicating that Beryl Christie was a domestic servant in 1936 when her infant daughter died." So there's another, and this person has written Beryl Christie and lost her daughter, and I'm going to pull it up here at the bottom of this email. She talks about like the birth dates. I'll get to that later. Do you guys have a close-up of this? Yeah. Okay. So you can see here, it is Beryl Christie, and this would mean not only did Beryl Christie lose a child in 1940, but prior to that, Beryl Christie lost a daughter in 1936. Okay. Again, all we have here is Beryl Christie. We know that this is potentially the right Beryl. Again, there could be another Beryl Christie going around. I don't want to completely close the door on that, but it is interesting. And I'll tell you why this struck me as incredibly interesting, because when we spoke about the death certificate yesterday, right, and we spoke about this young death of a woman, she's particularly died, Beryl Christie, of fibroids related to a hysterectomy. So if there is a Beryl Christie that had back-to-back, had lost children in some regard, you could imagine that she might have been injured internally. This is a long time ago. You would imagine that the procedures, obviously, are not what they are today. And it is plausible that that woman died young of fibroids from a hysterectomy related to the fact that she had two troubling births, whatever it is, carrying children didn't work out for her. I just thought, like, okay, but the big part about that second one is that we now know for a fact that there was a Beryl Christie that was, in fact, a domestic servant. Can you pull that back up again? Because I want to point that out so people can see this. The last one, the close-up of it, if we can. You can see that she is listed as a domestic servant. That girl is listed as the daughter of Beryl Christie. You can see that in that where it says rank, profession, or occupation, daughter of Beryl Christie, domestic servant. I don't know, guys. Like I said, I'm trying to now, I'm putting in columns to sort through the various Beryl Christies that were born around this time. Like I said, you guys keep sending me stuff, but just to make sure you're filtering yourself, we know for a fact that Beryl Christie was born in 1917. We know for a fact that Beryl Christie got married in 1944 to Lawland Newford, or whatever his name is, Lawford Newland, pardon. And so we don't need a bunch of documents speculating that it could be a different birth, because her parents are listed, and Kamala and her father have confirmed that her parents are Iris and Patrick Finnegan. Okay. So we know those are the people that we are looking for. Oddly enough, though, because a lot of people have been pointing out the fact that in her birth certificate, even though we know that that's her mom, Iris, that's the mom's name, Iris Finnegan, it says Magdalene, and then suddenly it converts to Christie. Well, I just wanted to point out to you, because that was a question we were getting a lot, is why would she take on Christie? In Donald Harris's piece, he writes explicitly that Miss Iris, so that's Kamala's great-grandmother, that her husband was known as Mr. Christie. So I'll read you that paragraph. It says, Miss Iris, mother of 8 children, I can't find 8 children, by the way, was the sweetest and gentlest person one could meet, but underneath it was a tough farming woman who ran the cane farm at Thatch Walk, jointly owned with her husband, Mr. Christie. So the reason she may have put Christie or started using Christie as a middle name is because that would mean that her father was being called Mr. Christie. Again, we are getting that directly from Donald J. Harris, who I'm now very interested in. I'm now very interested in this particular Donald J. Harris. Obviously, very easy way to debunk this, and maybe there really was just another Beryl Christie that happened to have a child named Donald in the same year from the same parish, would be to just take a look at Kamala's father's birth certificate. And we can't find that. We quite literally cannot find that, and I find that to be very strange. People were writing to me saying, hey, it looks like this was purposefully removed, that his birth certificate was removed, and I would just like to find it because it would just kind of let me be at ease and know that there's nothing further to look at other than this child, because it's just a very, very strange thing. Okay, I also wanted to just go over everything we do know about Donald J. Harris because I was interested in him suddenly. And the first thing is he, according to him, like Miss Christie in this piece is his paternal grandmother. He calls her Miss Christie. He acknowledges that they were descendants of the slave owner Hamilton Brown. And he is the founder of Brownstown. That's another thing that strikes me as very odd, and maybe there's something I'm missing here. But if you were a person that established a town and you had over 1,000 slaves, would you really just openly be married to some of these slaves? Like, is that something that would happen? I know that obviously they would have relations with the slaves, and that's something that is a reality. But in the way that they speak about their family, it's like they were just openly married with slave owners and slavers, which I find to be a little bit strange. As I said, he claims that Miss Christie owned and operated a dry goods store, and that she died in 1951 at the age of 70. Then we have Miss Iris, who he mentions, that's the maternal grandmother. We can actually get up this, we can get up the family tree so people can see this. He mentions Miss Iris, and that is the person that he completely fawns over. That's his maternal grandmother, Miss Iris. She was a farmer, an educator, he claims. And he also says, which I find to be quite strange, remember, he says he has the strongest relationship with Miss Iris, doesn't even mention his mother, Beryl. By the way, these photos are the ones that have been provided by Kamala herself and her father. I cannot verify that these are accurate photos, but we're just going to use the ones that they're given. But what's quite strange is he says that Miss Iris's ancestry is unknown to him. So I guess they never had that conversation despite how close they are. Again, she jointly owned the farm with her husband, Mr. Christie, and he died in 1981 at the age of 93. He says that she died at the age of 93 at the age of 1981. That's Miss Iris. Then you have Joseph Alexander Harris. Now that is the person who we are to understand that she was married to. The Harris name comes from his paternal grandfather, Joseph Alexander Harris. He was the landowner and the agricultural produce export, and he refers to the family property as Orange Hill. I think we need some Jamaicans to go out here and just start verifying stuff for me. And that Uncle Newton took over Orange Hill and started a limestone mining and brick producing operation in addition to cattle, grass, fruit, pimiento farming of earlier times. Now, again, I am just trying to understand how she came from a middle-class background. I mean, people that had slaves were super wealthy. It sounds like they always owned land, that they always potentially had servants. So I'm just trying to understand where this middle-class background comes from. My producer put in a note here that people in the live chat are saying that it's a Creole language, a native to Jamaica, when he starts speaking in this tongue. Okay, I literally didn't know that. I'm sorry, but I just found that he was writing in this way, which I found to be quite strange. I felt like he was trying to sell to us that they were definitely Jamaican or they were like descended from slaves, and they had slaves. So obviously his family actually had slaves, thousands of slaves there. So I thought that he was trying to lean into the slave language. So I'll correct that if that's actually English Creole. I don't know if he was trying to write English Creole. I actually never knew that that was a language that was native to Jamaica, but I do find it very interesting that that's something that he included all throughout this piece. And I would question some of the spelling of things. Like, is Creole, do you actually spell Y-U for you? Or is he just trying to basically signal to us that this was his family? Anyways, literally did not know that. So you learn something new every single day. So I also had a ton of other people that introduced some other things that I was not aware of. And I'm just going to kind of go through other things that people brought up that I found to be very interesting. First and foremost, someone told me to take a look again at Kamala's birth certificate. Chris, I don't know if I told you to pull that, but going to her original birth certificate, yeah. So they said, this person emailed me and they were just like, okay, Candace, it is amended in the middle there. So you see there's a stamp in the middle of her birth certificate that says amended 1 of 2. And this person apparently was born in the exact same place as Kamala at the exact same time. He claims that his birth certificate is a different color. Okay, not a big deal. But he said that there was some change made on this birth certificate because it says amended 1 of 2. And so I looked that up because I was like, oh, I didn't even recognize that. And it turns out that yes, in California and in other states, you can file to have your birth certificate amended if you want to change the name of the father, change the name of the mother, if there was some error, like maybe they spelled Kamala's name wrong and they wanted to change the spelling of her name, or if you just completed your adoption process is another reason in California that you are allowed to change the name or make an amendment, pardon. And so it is interesting that that does say amended 1 of 2. I don't know if this means that she amended it 2 times or what the deal is here, but that is something that is of note. And like I said, I'm trying to read through and sort through all of your emails and whitewashing history. But have you heard of blackwashing? Blackwashing is when you're a politician and it's election season and suddenly you have to relate to Black people. So you just sort of start making stuff up to blackify yourself, your history. You start dropping a bunch of slang and colloquialisms and hoping that the people will therefore understand you. Honestly, it's become something of a democratic rite of passage. Except this time, I think we may have caught the culprit red-handed. Of course, I'm speaking about Kamala Harris. I think her and her campaign team are really going to regret the day that their media henchmen came for Janet Jackson. So we were left with some major holes in Kamala's genealogy. We had from her father, Donald J. Harris, that he grew up in Jamaica and was raised by his grandmother, Miss Iris. He effectively wrote an entire piece about his Jamaican heritage and really focused on his grandmother, like she is the person that made the most difference for him. He honorably mentioned Miss Iris's husband, who he only referred to as Mr. Christie, and remained conspicuously silent about his own mother. How do you do that? How do you just say one sentence about your mother, refer to her as Miss Beryl? And I want to be clear, you're writing this for the population, right? You're talking about your heritage. Even if you called your mother Miss Beryl, you would probably, for the sake of wanting people to be clear on who you're referring to, list her full name. He didn't do that. He just said one sentence. This is not to, ignore my mother, Miss Beryl. And that was it. And we know that her full name, according to her birth certificate, is Beryl Magdalene Finnegan. And we know that at various times she took on the middle name Christie. He also mentioned in that piece that his father was Mass Oscar. I guess, again, that is kind of a slang way of referring to his father. But I was completely stumped. I was completely stumped as I was looking further into this because I could not find a marriage record between his father, Oscar Joseph Harris, Miss Oscar, and his mother, Beryl Finnegan. This is something that to me seemed really odd. And some people who wanted to rationalize it were saying, oh, no, that's just how things were. And sometimes people didn't have record. No, I wasn't buying any of that because we were dealing with a family that had money. It is just a fact that Kamala Harris's family descends from slavers. They were given money for their slaves. Somebody did the calculation essentially for that day and time. It would have been $11 million that they inherited for their slaves once it was abolished. It is why when he speaks about his Jamaican heritage, he speaks about them as having owned stores, right? So this is not your typical Black story that we're referring to here. And so I expected very much for there to be a record of marriage. Oddly, as you guys will recall, any records that I did find suggested to me that Beryl may have been the domestic help who may have also given birth to a son named Donald, born in 1938, who died before he even turned 2. So that was very strange. Question marks. We were like, okay, we're seeing this Beryl, we're seeing this Donald Harris, we're seeing that an infant died. What's really going on here? Why is it starting to feel like a scary movie? But of course, we want to rationalize it ourselves. Like maybe it is just a coincidence that another Beryl had another Donald in 1938 in St. Aaron Parish, and we shouldn't look too far into that. What we knew for certain was that Beryl, the correct Beryl, was married at the age of 25. So Donald Harris, who was presenting as Kamala's father, would have been 6 years old. She got married to a man named Lawford Newland, who he has completely erased from his childhood historical account. When he wrote this piece, he did not mention a Lawford Newland, a stepdaddy named Lawford Newland. And that was odd because then it would suggest that she would have had to have married his father, Oscar Joseph Harris, after that. So have the kid, marry someone else, and then go back and marry your baby daddy. I don't know, but I needed to find some records. And we also couldn't find a divorce record, by the way, between Lawford Newland and Beryl Finnegan. Where's the divorce record? We did see that he went to America. We searched there. He went through New Orleans. We went through California. We just could not find anything. And in my view, there were too many holes in his account. Numbers that he got wrong about the siblings. I just felt that there was a secret here. So I decided that we needed more information specifically about Donald J. Harris himself. And we couldn't find a birth certificate for him, which I flagged as odd. And I also wanted to find that marriage certificate between his father, Oscar J. Harris, and his mother, Beryl Finnegan. That was crucial to me. So here's what we stumbled upon. More information about Donald J. Harris appeared to us. This is going to get crazy, you guys. I'll tell you how we put this together. Through old Jamaican newspaper clippings that had been digitized. So first and foremost, this one fact checks, but it was a little bit of tidbit of an information that I thought was interesting. It was a wedding announcement that was published in the Kingston Gleaner. That's the name of the newspaper. It was published, as you can see here, November 1st, 1963, which just announces the wedding of presumably Kamala's mother, as we're told, Shyamala Gopalin, to Donald J. Harris. It reads, he is the son of Oscar J. Harris of Spanish Town and Mrs. Beryl Finnegan. Okay. It writes before leaving, it says before leaving Jamaica in and can you pull that up? Because I couldn't read it for clarity. But it says before leaving Jamaica in, it looks like maybe I don't want to guess it. Mr. Harris worked for the Jamaican Information Service. Okay, what is the Jamaican Information Service? That's what I asked myself. What is that? I'll tell you what it is. The Jamaican Information Service is an executive agency of the government of Jamaica that is responsible for disseminating information. It used to be known as the Government Public Relations Office. It says that to achieve its objectives, the agency utilizes a broad range of media skill sets: print, radio, television, graphic arts, video projection, and public relations. It was established in 1956. Okay, so now we know that before he left Jamaica, he worked for the government. So he's got some connections in government. And he's not the only one, because that newspaper article goes on to inform us that his bride, who we're told is Kamala's mother, is the daughter of Mr. P.V. Gopalin, the Deputy Secretary of the Government of India. So she is also connected to the government of India, and her dad is the Deputy Secretary of the Government of India. That's just a thing that I think is important to know, that these two people worked for the government and they came together and they got married. Now, we still could not find a marriage record between these two, but it may be plausible that they got married somewhere else, but at least we see the announcement. So I thought, now let's focus on his father, right? I'm looking for something to attach Oscar to Beryl, presumably, if this is a family that is important enough to have wedding announcements in the newspaper. Maybe we will be able to stumble upon something between Oscar and Beryl. Now, I want to remind you that Kamala brought up Oscar J. Harris, her grandfather, in her book, and she reveals a picture of him on page 282. So I'm going to show you that right now. It reads, "When I was 10 months old, I visited Spanish Town, Jamaica. This is me with my mother and my paternal grandfather, Oscar Joseph." So we know his name is Oscar Joseph Harris, and we know that that's what he looks like thanks to Kamala Harris's book. Great. Love that. So I looked him up, and at first the father came up for a bankruptcy hearing announcement. This is dated, by the way, March 11th, 1939. So this would have been 1 year after Donald was allegedly born. It just reads, in the matter of bankruptcy petition against Reginald Victor Harris, Oscar Joseph Harris, and Newton Alexander Harris of Brownstown in the parish of St. Anne, trading as Harris Bros, take notice that the above named intend to apply for the revocation of the provisional order of bankruptcy made against them in this honorable court on the 6th day of January 1939. Okay, so we know that they were apparently going through some bankruptcy proceedings, and they were fighting those bankruptcy proceedings. They were going to stand against them. But what's relevant there is that we know it's him because it lists his brothers. It lists that they're from Browntown, and we have fact-checked that genealogy. So this is the correct family. This is the grandfather that Kamala is referring to in her book. Here is where it is going to get crazy. Buckle up. I really hope you guys are sitting for this. He came up again, and fortunately, it was for a wedding. Unfortunately, it was not for a wedding to Beryl. Instead, just like Beryl married somebody else, apparently he married somebody else. Now, this clipping is from June 9th, 1952. Look at this. It says, Oscar Harris weds Vioris Cambridge. Now I want you to look at this photo, and it certainly looks like, and I know it's a shadow on the left-hand side, but I'm going, that looks like the picture. You can tell by that balding pattern of the person that Kamala has presented to us as her grandfather. And he looks mixed race to me, but that woman on the right looks white to me. Now I know you're going, Candace, that's crazy. It's a black and white photo, but there's a certain way when you're photographing a black woman that she comes across, and that ain't it, my friends. But again, that was a theory. Let's read the article. It reads, Vioris Cambridge, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. V.S. Cambridge of St. Elizabeth, that's another parish in Jamaica, became the bride of Oscar Harris of Browntown, St. Anne, at a beautiful ceremony in the St. Andrew Parish Church, Halfway Tree, on Thursday last night. Her slenderness enhanced by a gown of white nylon and chantilly lace. The bride, carrying a bouquet of white asters, was given in marriage by her father. Her only attendant, her sister, Carmen Cambridge, wore a gown of aqua nylon and chantilly lace with a bouquet of pink rosebuds. The best man in the ceremony, performed by the Reverend Grant Levi of Montego Bay, was Mr. Newton Harris, brother of the groom. During the signing of the register, Mr. Gene McDonald sang, I'll Walk Beside You, and Because, at a reception held at the home of the bride's uncle on Chester Avenue, Mr. Milton Hamilton was master of ceremonies. I just went, what the heck is this? First and foremost, how odd that Donald J. Harris, as he's recollecting these memories from his childhood, now has left out the part where Beryl married someone when he would have been 6 years old and would have been his stepfather. But he's also now leaving out the fact that his mother similarly married someone when he was a little bit older. That his father similarly married someone when he was a little bit older, and that woman, at least according to my eyes, appears to me to be fully Caucasian. But I said, that sounds crazy. Let me see if I can find this woman, Vioris Cambridge, by a quick Google search. That's quite a different name, Vioris. I've never heard it before. Certainly something's going to pop up, and certainly just one thing did. And it was a funeral entry of a white woman who died in Broward County. And what I noticed about this entry was that it was very scant on details. I'm going to show this to you. Okay? Vioris Anita McPherson, it says. And I'm looking at that face on the left there, and I'm going, I recognize that face. This woman looks familiar to me. Am I crazy? Are you guys seeing this? She looks a little bit like Kamala Harris. There's something about the smirk. I don't know. Am I crazy? So I said, let me not jump to conclusions. Maybe I am just so down far the rabbit hole that I'm seeing Kamala's face. So I read this entry, and it says, it is with great sadness that the family of Vioris Anita Harris McPherson Cambridge, in parentheses, so we know that that's her maiden name right there, announces her passing on Saturday, June 15th, 2019. She will be lovingly remembered by her children and spouses, her grandchildren and spouses, her great-grandchildren, cousins, nieces, nephews, and friends. We will celebrate her life on Saturday, June 29th, 2019 at 10 o'clock a.m. at Christ the Rock Community Church. It gives the address there, and it says where they will immediately follow at a reception hall. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Alzheimer's Foundation in memory of Vioris Harris McPherson. So nothing given to us there, literally nothing given to us about our family. Have you ever seen that? Usually survived by a sister, a cousin, a brother. I went to see if anybody posted anything. It says she has a really big family. I was like, okay, well, certainly somebody would have posted on the board. You know, people do that all the time. I'm so sorry for your loss. Love you. Cousin, I'll see you there. Hug, kisses, nothing. Very weird. I then tried to look this woman up in Broward County records, and it just looks like people are trying to protect who she was. It doesn't tell me who she's married. I don't see anything there in Broward County. It just says an entry for a marriage that took place in 1994. And I also see that she's got another name there, McPherson. So maybe she got remarried. But it at least tells us that her birthday was October 7th, 1927. So I thought to myself, can I find a woman, a white woman who was born in Jamaica with that exact birth date, with that exact name? It's, like I said, a very different name, Vioris. And the answer is yes, we did. We were able to locate her birth certificate. And now we know why it said that she was married to V.S. Cambridge. It had listed her father as V.S. Cambridge, Mr. and Mrs. V.S. Cambridge. That's because her father's name is Vivian. Her mother's name is Adina Wright. And here you have it, born in Elizabeth. St. Elizabeth is... here she is. This is this woman, Vioris Cambridge, born to Vivian Cambridge and Adina Wright on October 7th, 1927 in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. What the hell is going on? Who is this woman? Why hasn't this been mentioned? Why does it feel like this profile was being very hidden? And again, as Donald was jumping in to his family background and speaking about how Jamaican it was, why didn't he mention this? Why didn't he mention this woman, his white relatives? It might be relevant when we're having a discussion about Kamala's race to mention the fact that your dad married a white woman. I'm just saying, here's another picture of her, and there's something familiar about her smile. There's something familiar. I'm looking at this woman, I'm going, this woman looks to me like Kamala Harris. Now, something even weirder, the person who did create something for her online, okay, who created a profile for her on Ancestry.com, look what he put in the middle of her name. He lists her name as Vioris Anita Iris Cambridge. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So we looked into this briefly. And again, all of this has transpired within the last 4 hours. So we are not as organized about this, or I shouldn't say, we are not as certain about this, but it looks like the person who made this entry was a member of her extended family. It looks like she got remarried in 1994 in America and that's where she picks up the name McPherson. And that individual put Iris in quotation marks. Is it possible that Donald J. Harris, when he's fondly remembering Miss Iris, could be speaking about this woman? Yeah, it's possible. Everything's a possibility. Like I said, he's very scant on the details here. What we do know is that he declined to mention this woman. He declined to mention someone that his father married who was completely white. And as I said, I wouldn't have an issue with this if people were forthcoming and spoke about this. The press, as you're out there referring to Janet Jackson as crazy, right, for suggesting, what did Janet Jackson say? She said that she heard that Kamala's father, Donald J. Harris, was Irish. Can somebody pull up that picture of Vioris again? She heard that his family was Irish. I think Vioris, maybe Vioris Cambridge, might be Irish. Was she so crazy to mention that, press? Would it be so crazy if you guys did your actual job and looked into these things as opposed to constantly trying to obscure things to protect your preferred candidates because you believe she should just be handed this? Now the question is it possible that the woman that we're looking at right there is Kamala's grandmother? Is it possible, based on the records that we have, that Beryl and Donald never did marry? Is it possible Beryl and Oscar, never did marry? Is it possible, is it feasible that that marriage never took place and they both married two different people, and that instead at some point when they decided to blackify Kamala's history, they included this Beryl as her grandmother? Is it possible? I don't want to go too far down conspiracy lane, but I'm telling you that we're close here. This is a big missing piece of her family history that should have been mentioned, okay? And I find it highly suspicious. I do not think that we have answers still on who Donald Harris is. I do not trust him. I do not trust him just having discovered this information and realizing that he left out two significant marriages and is instead focusing on Kamala's great-grandmother, referring to her as Miss Iris. Who is Miss Iris actually? I can tell you that, again, we came across all of this in the last few hours. But we're going to stay on them because now that we have found this piece and we have found this white woman, and again, I'm not trying to call her out for being a white woman. I'm just saying that, like, she is a white woman. She's very white. And Janet Jackson was not crazy to suggest this. And now we know that somebody is putting her in quotation marks as Iris, and a picture is starting to come together. Let me say this. If, and I'm not saying this is true, but if we find out that woman is Kamala's real grandmother. And can we get a side-by-side of Kamala? If we find out that is Kamala's real grandmother and that she decided to appropriate the domestic help who potentially died younger as her grandmother, we are watching one of the most diabolical political moves that we have ever seen in the history of this country. I just want to say that. I'm not saying it's true, again, but I'm saying that I don't like the picture. I always find that the dog that isn't barking, the fact that they never mentioned these marriages, the fact that they laughed people out of the room when they suggested that Kamala Harris could be white, and the fact that they just refused to mention any aspect of this and are remaining hush-hush on it, doesn't make me feel good. I don't trust these people. There's something about Kamala saying she's in these streets that doesn't make me feel that she's being honest about who she actually is. And I'm not going to let go of this. Again, we are getting closer and closer, and I will bet you the DNC is paying attention to this show now. All right, I'm actually really happy it's Friday because I feel like we need the weekend to go through all of the emails and all the documents, and I'm just so obsessed with this now that I just need a day break, or a 2-day break rather, to really dive into this, because now we have an entire family. And I need to look into specifically Vioris's family, other relatives. Obviously, I'm not going to share any of their information. We've found a lot, but it would help. It would help us better understand why Kamala is hiding an entire piece of her family. It's completely bizarre. So what we want to do today, because so many of you guys are emailing me, is to just organize what we know for a fact, plus tell you a couple of new things that we've discovered in the last few hours. And then if you want to send me more stuff, just make sure it's one of the things, or it's pertaining to one of the things that we have a question mark on. So first, we're going to just go through a timeline of the relevant people. Let's start with Beryl Magdalene Christie. So we're going to actually give you guys this timeline so you can look through it. Anything that is italicized means that it's still a question mark. We're still wondering whether or not this document could be Beryl or could be somebody else, and we're awaiting a confirmation. What we know for a fact is that Beryl was born in 1917. We know this because we have the birth certificate, and Iris's name, which is Beryl's mother, is listed as Iris Finnegan on the birth certificate. Again, Beryl is spelled slightly differently, but we know because of Kamala's book that name spelling shifted over the years and was also spelled with a Y. We then have a document, and this is highly suspicious, that Beryl birthed Donald Harris. Allegedly, this could be Kamala's father. The only problem is that we're looking here not at a birth certificate, but a death certificate, which would put the birth of Donald around 1938. It looks like this infant died just a few months short of turning 2 years old. So could have been born in 1938, died in 1940 November. And it says, oddly, that this is the son of Albert Harris. So that's confusing. But this is the only document that we could find for a Donald Harris that has a mother named Beryl Harris. And again, that Donald died. So this one is a question mark. We know for a fact, however, that Beryl Magdalene Finnegan was married in 1944. She was 25 years old. We have that marriage certificate, and she was married to Lawford Newland. And here is where things get strange, because we were able to locate the divorce document between Lawford Newland and Beryl Magdalene, and that divorce took place in 1956. Okay, so they were married. That would mean if Donald Harris, J. Harris, was in fact born, Kamala's father was in fact born in 1938, and they didn't divorce until 1956, and he grew up with Beryl, as he signifies in his book, My Mother, Miss Beryl, or in his Jamaican paper that he wrote about his ancestral roots, that would mean throughout the majority of his young life, from the time he was 6 till the time he was 18, his mother, Miss Beryl, was married to Lawford Newland, and yet he declined to mention Lawford Newland at all. Major, major question mark. We move on to a possible death certificate, and I feel very strongly that this is the correct death certificate. 1960 for Beryl Christie Finnegan. We are learning here that she died of fibroids, and as we know, if this is a woman who suffered with birth, this could make sense. The story could make sense that she died a couple of years after she got divorced. But again, we're not completely sure. We're looking for something that is concrete, where we can say, yes, this Beryl Finnegan died in 1960, which then makes Kamala's timeline of having met her grandmother, who had died before she was even born, highly suspicious. Then we jump to 1995, because people have been sharing this other possible death certificate. And I'm going to rank this as a very low likelihood. One, because somebody sent me an email and they gave me a strong lead that this could actually be a different Beryl Christie Clark. And we're going to look into that further. But also because the person listed as having been there when she died was Douglas Finnegan. And we don't have a Douglas Finnegan in this family. And also, if you look at the date of death and the age, 81 years old, that would mean that this individual was born in 1914, which would have been before our Beryl was born. So we're going to continue to rule this one out by trying to locate who that Douglas Finnegan is that signed. But I rank this as a very low likelihood, but we want to keep it here as possible because it's not entirely ruled out. Now let's jump over to Oscar Joseph Harris, Beryl's alleged husband, who I am now certain was never her husband, and I'll explain why. Okay, we know for a fact that Oscar Joseph Harris, who Kamala purports is her grandfather in her book, was born in 1914. On April 5th, we have that birth document, making it all the more suspicious that we can't find her alleged father's, Donald Harris's, who was born after him. We then know, which we discovered yesterday, super huge development, that he married and that wedding was recorded in the local newspaper, the Daily Gleaner. And you can see, even though it's a shadowed photo, that very much looks like the photo of Oscar Joseph Harris that she shared. And because of the details that were provided in this article, we know for a fact that it is him because it lists the fact that his brother Newton stood in as best man. And we know for a fact that Newton is the brother. So we know for a fact that they got married, and he died in 1976 in St. Catherine. We have his death certificate. Now, I want to point this out to you because this is actually something that's quite odd. Allegedly, he only had one child, and that child was Kamala's father. That's what we are told, that his only child was Donald J. Harris. But something's not right there, because if you look at this death certificate, look at the bottom here. You see that the person that is the informant, letting them know that he died, is Christopher Harris. And when you look under, it asks, what is your qualification? Essentially, what is your qualification to inform? And it's his son. It says in parentheses, his qualification is son. And so his son was there, and his son's name is Christopher Harris, not Donald Harris. And I'm just wondering, who is Christopher Harris? This is a major question mark. Donald Harris, do you have a brother named Christopher Harris? If not, is Donald Harris actually the son of Oscar Harris? We'll get into more of that later. Okay, now let's look at Viora Anita Cambridge Harris, because we know that she got married. What we know for a fact about her is that she was born in 1927. We were able to locate her birth certificate. Yes, Vioris Cambridge was born in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. We know, again, as we already mentioned, that she married Oscar Joseph Harris, and we know that because there was a huge announcement about the wedding. And then we wanted to be able to track how long they stayed married for. Did they actually stay married until he died? And it looks like they did, in fact, stay married until he died. And this is how we know. Her name appears in that Daily Gleaner in 1966. So in the corner there, you can see that it says Vioris Harris. It says Mrs. Vioris Harris, implying that she is still married and she has been appointed to the senior postmaster position. So we know that they were still very much married at this time. And then we know that he died in 1976 and she kept his name by choice, okay, when she was naturalized in the United States. Okay, we found her documents of naturalization. I'm going to show that to you. This is in 1991. And there is a portion of this where it explicitly asks her if she wants to change her name. So she has the option here to go back to Cambridge. Her husband is now dead, and she decides she doesn't want to do that. You can see number 4 there. I request that my name be changed to none. So when she was naturalized, she kept her married last name, which is Vioris Anita Harris. So major problem here, again, when we get into Donald J. Harris's story that he told in the newspaper about his Jamaican heritage, because we now know that they got married and then they stayed married until he died. So Mass Oscar, the entire time, was married to this white woman whose name is Vioris Cambridge Harris. We then know that at some point, she was able to abandon her marriage and maybe just filed something that he was deceased. We have not located that form, so that's another question mark. But she did remarry a man named Errol McPherson, okay, in 1994. We know that for a fact because there are records down in Florida that indicate that. And then we know that she died in 2019 in Broward County. Of course, I've already shared with you yesterday the funeral website. So if you guys are like me and you like to take notes, we're leaving this up for you so that you can know exactly what it is that we have and follow this timeline as we continue to investigate it. So let's talk about the major issues that our timeline presents. So I believe it is undeniable, having seen her face and her smile, that Vioris is very clearly related to Kamala Harris. Okay. So obviously we naturally think that this must be Kamala Harris's grandmother. But here's a problem. In order for that to be Kamala Harris's grandmother, Vioris would have had to have birthed Donald Harris, Kamala's father, when she was just 11 years old. I find that to be extremely unlikely. Extremely unlikely that Vioris, and she would have been at Cambridge then, so they would have had to have had some sort of affair before they got married, okay? So he was born in 1938. She would have had to have been pregnant when she was 10, right? She would have been pregnant in 1937, gave birth in 1938. Then they decided to hold off on the wedding until 1944. You know, maybe they did. Maybe he got a 10-year-old pregnant and they waited until she was older to get married. But I think that's extremely unlikely that an 11-year-old girl gave birth. And if she did give birth, I don't think her father would have walked her down the aisle as he did. We learned that from the entry in the Gleaner, in the Daily Gleaner. It was announced that her father, V.S. Cambridge, held her hand as they walked down the aisle. I think your dad, if some random person knocked you up at the age of 10, probably wouldn't have done that. He probably would have chased him with a shotgun. I'm imagining here. But that was what we would have to believe in order for this to be Kamala's grandmother. And the other thing that I keep asking myself is, why lie about this? Why is Kamala hiding this woman who she's very clearly closely related to? That's the other issue that I have, because okay, yeah, I get it. They always want to lean into being Black, but people don't have a problem if you just have one white grandparent. You know, she could have tried to grift this in a different way. She could have tried to complicate it in a different way, but she was dead set on hiding this woman. Why? There's something here that we're missing about Vioris Cambridge Harris that presents a problem for Kamala Harris. Is it because of the age gap? Maybe. The thing is, Donald J. Harris is the biggest problem in our story. We keep arriving at the Donald J. Harris problem. This is what we need to really focus all of our attention to, because we don't have any birth certificate for him, despite the fact that we have birth certificates for everyone else around him. We've got birth certificates for his uncles. We have birth certificates for his father. We have birth certificates for every single person in his orbit. We have birth certificate for Vioris. There's no reason. It's very clear that they had no troubles keeping records in this family. But there's no birth certificate for Donald J. Harris. We also cannot find a marriage certificate for him. So we mentioned to you guys yesterday, we found a marriage announcement here in Jamaica. We also found a marriage announcement near Oakland. The announcement, we've also seen an entry for the divorce. An entry, by the way, we still have not been able to find a divorce docket. We're looking for it in the court system. It should be there. But why does he not have any concrete documents? Where is their actual marriage certificate? There was an announcement, by the way, for an annulment, published near Oakland, that they had filed for an annulment in 1971. But again, we cannot locate the marriage certificate, and I find that to be problematic. What we do know, by the way, so that you guys don't go off in the wrong direction, is that the mother is listed as Goplin Iyer. So we were at first looking for Shyamala Iyer. It looks like when they were married, she was married under just Goplin Iyer. And so if you're going to try to locate this marriage certificate, I would suggest editing to looking for her name in particular. My instinct is that he maybe had a different name that he was using, a different legal name that he was using. And then there is the problem with his entire story that he presents when he writes about his Jamaican heritage. His memory is either extremely faulty or he's an outright liar. In his memory, he writes that he completely neglects to include the fact that his mother, who he calls Miss Beryl, was married to Lawford Newland and remained married to him for 12 years of his life, from the time he was 6 until he was 18 years old. That is a major problem. You don't forget that when you're writing about your upbringing. Actually, she was married to somebody else. He recounts growing up with Oscar Harris, right? Mass Oscar, as he refers to him, and Miss Beryl. But both of them were married to other people when he was growing up, not to one another. This is why we cannot find a marriage record between Beryl and Oscar. My conclusion is they were never married. They were never married, because Oscar was married to his wife Vioris until he died in 1976. So Donald's story makes entirely no sense. He lied or he misremembered. And in fact, the only scenario in which he is telling the truth about all of them being there on the farm at the exact same time is if Miss Iris was actually Vioris, the white woman, okay, who was married to his father, Oscar Harris, Mass Oscar, with the domestic help, Miss Beryl Finnegan, who died young, and her mother, Iris Finnegan, on hand. That could make sense to me, right? Because I understand how that works, how an entire family will work on a farm for another family. As you know, my grandfather grew up on a sharecropping farm in the South. This would have been around that same time. My grandfather was born in 1942, so I could see that making sense. But then again, we would have to arrive at the diabolical conclusion that she turned the help into her family because she wanted the public to think that she had a blacker history of some description. But as I said, we still have a major Donald Harris problem. We have no birth certificate, and we also don't know who or where Christopher Harris is, Oscar's son, who was present at the time of his death. I've looked up Christopher Harris in the records. I'm looking to see if there's any birth records in St. Anne Parish where they all seem to have been born. I've checked St. Elizabeth as well, because that's where Vioris was born. I can't find any trace of a Christopher Harris. If you have better luck, send it to me at info@CandaceOwens.com. But here is something that we do know about Donald Harris. We know for a fact that Donald Harris was a committed communist. And what do we know about communists in general? Communists change their identities the entire time. They steal identities and they change their name. That is like a witchcraft that they have perfected. Historically speaking, every major communist figure that you know changed their name. They don't use their real names. Joseph Stalin was not Joseph Stalin. Vladimir Lenin was not Vladimir Lenin. Pol Pot was not Pol Pot. A good commie knows that you have to change your identity and continually change your identity. Here's my theory, okay? And again, now we are speculating. We are in the theory zone. So these are not backed by facts. And I'm going to continue to look and I'll debunk my own theory if I come across different evidence. But my gut is telling me that Donald Harris is simply lying about who he is. I'm not even convinced that he is Kamala's father at all. Because as I said, the lie has to be so big that it was worthy of her changing who her grandparent was in the storyline. What is it that she's hiding? Kamala also looks a little too much like her grandmother. Do you kind of get where I'm going with this? I'm going to show you this picture of Kamala with who we are told is her mother, Shyamala Goplin. Shyamala, again, if you're looking for documents pertaining to her, don't use Shyamala. But this is just a picture of Shyamala in her youth. And we're going to compare that to who we now know is definitely her relative, Vioris. Who does Kamala favor here? Like how her mother looks extremely Indian on the left-hand side there, but actually, I don't think she looks like Kamala at all. Who does she favor more? Now, I want to be clear. That's just we're using our own eyes. The reality is that genetics can be extremely unpredictable, especially when you start race mixing. Obviously, you know I have racially mixed kids. I have my son, my third born, has blonde hair. He looks exactly like his father, but he looks exactly like his father. You know, he looks exactly like his father. And I've seen kids that favor their grandparents. Like that could definitely happen. Like I said, genetics is funny business. You never know what gene you're going to hit, but I am just saying that she really, really, really favors Vioris, who she has gone through great lengths to obscure. I'm actually going to show you a picture of Kamala pictured between her grandparents, or at least Oscar J. Harris and Vioris. Like, I could see that being mom and dad, like potentially being her mother and her father. I don't know. Obviously, I'm just saying that this feels like we are in the right family tree here. Then there is this interesting tidbit, because I'm like, if she's very related to Vioris, it's unlikely that she would have missed this funeral. Vioris was, as we mentioned, buried in Broward County. She was buried on June 29th, 2019. And if I'm correct here, and Kamala has known her throughout her entire life, she probably would have made sure she was down there in Broward County. Well, what we do know for a fact is that on the day before the funeral, Kamala was right up the road in Miami, on stage at the Democratic primary debate. Of course, this could just be a coincidence that she was in Florida, we know for a fact, the day before the funeral, but it would also be a coincidence that they waited 2 weeks after Vioris' death to bury her. So Vioris died on June 15th, and they didn't bury her until 2 weeks later on June 29th. That is irregularly long. The only time I've ever seen that ever, I'm not kidding, in all of the funerals that I have attended in my lifetime, was when a friend of mine had her father die, and he was very close with Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton was running for president, and they waited 2 weeks so that Hillary Clinton had a hole in her schedule and would be able to attend the funeral. And I thought it was so odd, so odd. So perhaps they too were waiting for someone who was busy to be able to attend the funeral. Or maybe they just were going slow and decided to wait 2 weeks to bury her. We don't know. I'm just introducing these facts to the public because we are trying to paint a full picture. Now, unfortunately, Kamala's mother passed away back in 2009. I mean, there is an expression that people say, dead men tell no tales, and so we won't be able to prod that narrative any further. But I'm not going to let go of this narrative. I'm going to keep investigating this because I feel like we are very, very close, and there's something very big that we are missing here that Kamala wants hidden. And it obviously pertains to this woman, Vioris. And so if you can help at all this weekend with your research, I'm just hoping that this will help you better focus it. We really are looking for documents pertaining to Donald J. Harris, because there doesn't appear to be any documents pertaining to Christopher Harris, whoever he is. We're also trying to locate so that we can rule out one of the death certificates of Beryl, a Douglas Finnegan that would have been present for a different Beryl, who I believe is a different Beryl that had died in 1995. Let's try to focus this research, and we're going to stay on it. I absolutely promise you.
Excellent. Be sure to like the video to support the channel. And definitely share your experiences and insights in the comment section. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so we don't miss you.